200 feet width, could accommodate full-scale warships and thousands of combatants. Artificial lake included mechanical devices for creating realistic sea conditions, wave generators, A systems for introducing floating debris, and oil slicks simulating actual naval combat environments. Participants were primarily condemned criminals, prisoners of war, rebellious slaves facing certain death regardless of performance. Unlike gladiatorial combat where skill could lead to survival, naval battles were designed as mass executions disguised as entertainment. Condemned, given real weapons and seaworthy vessels. But battles continued until most participants were dead, with survivors often executed afterward to complete spectacle. Historical reenactments provided themes: Battle of Salamis, Conquest of Syracuse, conflicts with pirates. These allowed Roman audiences to relive empire's maritime triumphs while watching enemies die in realistic naval combat. Logistics were staggering. Ships constructed or modified for arena use with reinforced hulls capable of ramming. Crews of condemned men required basic naval training. Specialized equipment manufactured for single-use entertainment. Cost of single major naumachia could exceed annual budget of entire province. Roman festivals often culminated in mass executions, demonstrating imperial power while entertaining vast crowds. During major holidays and military triumphs, hundreds or thousands of condemned would be executed simultaneously using various methods. Trajan's Dacian victory celebration exemplified scale 123 days. Over teen. 000 gladiators and condemned prisoners executed. Shri. 000 animals slaughtered. These numbers, possibly exaggerated by ancient chroniclers, indicate massive scale of violence Romans considered appropriate for celebrating military success. The emperor's triumph required proportional carnage. Seasonal festivals provided regular opportunities for mass executions tied to religious and agricultural cycles. Organization required sophisticated logistical planning comparable to military campaigns. Condemned collected from across empire, transported to execution sites, housed and fed until appointed deaths, processed through killing machinery with assembly line efficiency. Different execution methods employed simultaneously to maintain spectator interest: crucifixions, beast attacks, burnings, gladiatorial combats occurring concurrently in different arena sections. Economic impact was enormous, creating industries dedicated to supporting festival slaughter. Gladiator schools, animal suppliers, weapons manufacturers, specialized construction crews all profited from empire's appetite for organized violence. Entire regions became dependent on supplying condemned prisoners. Exotic animals, specialized equipment. Contemporary accounts describe atmosphere during mass executions as resembling religious ecstasy, with crowds increasingly frenzied as death toll mounted. These festivals provided outlets for collective bloodlust while reinforcing social bonds through shared witnessing of violence. But behind elaborate spectacles lay human beings whose lives were consumed by Rome's appetite for violent entertainment: gladiators, condemned criminals, prisoners of war. Enslaved beast fighters weren't merely props, they were individuals with names. Histories. Humanity that Roman society systematically denied. Gladiatorial schools Ludi housed thousands of men whose lives were dedicated to preparing for violent death. Average career lasted 2 to 5 years, with most dying violently before age 30. Statistical analysis of gladiatorial tombstones suggests experienced fighters had roughly 10% chance of dying in any given combat. Survival for multiple years required exceptional skill, luck, and crowd appeal. Most successful gladiators could earn freedom after surviving dozens of fights, but they represented tiny minority. Women also participated both as gladiators and condemned criminals. Female gladiators, while less common, fought in specialized matches. Roman audiences found particularly titillating. These women faced same mortal dangers as male fighters, while enduring additional sexual exploitation and social stigma. Psychological impact on arena participants was devastating and largely ignored. Modern understanding of trauma suggests survivors would have suffered what we recognize as PTSD, depression, other mental health conditions. Ancient sources occasionally hint at gladiators' psychological distress, fighters who refused to perform, attempted suicide, suffered mental breakdowns, but accounts typically focus on inconvenience to organizers rather than human suffering. Medical care was sophisticated by ancient standards, but motivated primarily by economic rather than humanitarian concerns. Arena physicians developed advanced techniques for treating combat injuries, setting bones, managing blood loss to preserve valuable fighting stock. Archaeological evidence from gladiator cemeteries reveals both quality of medical treatment and inevitability of violent death skeletons showing healed injuries alongside fatal wounds. So what are the survival lessons from Rome's 600-year experiment in industrialized violence? First, recognize that systematic state brutality always justifies itself through higher purposes. Romans claimed arena violence honored gods, taught civic virtue, demonstrated imperial benevolence. Every authoritarian regime develops similar narratives. Learning to see through official justifications to actual purposes, population control, elimination of dissidents. Normalization of cruelty is essential for recognizing when violence is becoming systematized. Second, theatrical violence serves specific political functions. When executions become entertainment, when killing is choreographed for maximum dramatic impact. Authorities aren't just eliminating enemies, they're teaching entire populations to accept brutality as normal. The 50,000 spectators watching you die as Orpheus aren't threats to regime. They're being trained to participate in its violence. Third, professional torture is more dangerous than chaotic violence. Rome's ludi, specialized animal trainers, arena architects, execution choreographers. This professionalization made violence sustainable for centuries. When cruelty becomes a career with training programs and specialized knowledge, when killing machinery requires engineers and maintenance crews, you're dealing with something that won't collapse through moral awakening. It's institutionalized. Fourth, economic incentives sustain violent systems far longer than ideology alone. The industries built around Roman arena culture, gladiator schools, exotic animal trade, amphitheater construction, weapons manufacturing created financial stakes in maintaining violence. Entire regions depended economically on supplying arena spectacles. This teaches us that systems of violence become self-perpetuating once enough people profit from them. Fifth, religious or ideological sanctification makes violence nearly impossible to eliminate through rational argument. When Romans believed spilled blood honored gods, when they saw executions as sacred duty, appealing to mercy or ethics was futile. You couldn't reason them out of positions they hadn't reasoned themselves into. Sixth, complicit populations are violence's greatest enabler. Those 50,000 000 spectators cheering as the lion tears through your flesh. They're not individually sadistic. Most are ordinary people who've accepted that this is normal, that certain lives are expendable, that entertainment justifies cruelty. Mass participation transforms violence from regime policy into cultural practice that survives regime changes. Seventh, the gap between official legal categories and actual threat determines who gets targeted. Rome reserved damnatio ad bestias for lowest criminals and enemies of state. But who decided what crimes deserved this fate? What behaviors made someone enemy of state Christians refusing to sacrifice? Slaves who ran away. Prisoners of war. The categories were flexible enough to encompass anyone authorities wanted eliminated. Eighth escape is more effective than resistance once machinery starts operating. By the time you're in that underground cell being fitted with Orpheus costume, your options are gone. The survival strategy was recognizing danger months earlier when Christian persecution began intensifying, when neighbors started disappearing, when public rhetoric about enemies escalated. That was the moment to flee. Not to hope reason would prevail. Ninth, documentation of atrocities serves dual purposes. Rome kept meticulous records of arena spectacles who died. How? In what numbers? Short term. This demonstrated power and deterred resistance. Long term. It preserved evidence of systematic brutality that we can still study today. When authoritarian regimes document their violence, they're creating testimony that will eventually be used against them. Finally, cultural transformation occurs slowly but comprehensively. Constantine's conversion to Christianity in early 4th century didn't immediately end arena violence. It took another century of gradual change, economic pressures, shifting values, rising popularity of chariot racing before final gladiatorial contest in 435 CE. This teaches us that defeating systematized violence requires sustained effort across multiple fronts: economic, religious, cultural, political. No single factor eliminates entrenched cruelty. The decline of Roman arena culture offers its own lessons. Economic costs became unsustainable as empire faced military pressures, plague outbreaks, administrative challenges. Provincial cities that had competed to host magnificent games found resources stretched by defensive needs. Maintenance of gladiator schools, exotic animal collections. Amphitheater infrastructure became luxury expenses cash-strapped administrations couldn't justify. Christian theology provided intellectual frameworks for policies gradually restricting arena bloodshed. Church fathers argued gladiatorial spectacles corrupted both participants and spectators, creating spiritual as well as physical death. Their theological arguments against state-sponsored violence gave imperial reformers justifications for change that appealed to changing popular values. Rise of chariot racing as preferred entertainment displaced gladiatorial combat. Circus races were dangerous for participants, but didn't require systematic killing of humans. Less expensive and more compatible with Christian sensibilities. Archaeological evidence documents physical transformation of amphitheaters during late Empire. Many venues converted to other uses. Arena floors built over, seating areas repurposed. Colosseum underwent multiple modifications, including installation of workshops and housing within ancient killing ground. These changes reflect both economic necessity and cultural rejection of buildings' original purposes. Final recorded gladiatorial contest occurred in 435 CE, ending institution that defined Roman culture for nearly 7 centuries. But arena violence didn't disappear entirely. Modified forms persisted in various contexts. Basic model of public execution as entertainment resurfaced throughout European history. Medieval tournaments directly descended from Roman gladiatorial traditions. Knights competing in martial contests before cheering crowds recreated essential dynamics of arena combat. Public executions throughout medieval and early modern Europe retained theatrical elements pioneered in Roman arenas. Scaffold became stage, where condemned played final roles before audiences expecting both justice and entertainment. Modern sports spectacles preserve essential elements of arena, culture, crowd dynamics, hero worship, vicarious violence, boxing, football. Contact sports satisfy audience desires for controlled combat within safe legal frameworks. Architecture of modern stadiums consciously evokes Roman amphitheaters. So here's what medieval survival skills wants you to understand from Rome's arena culture. Systematic violence doesn't announce itself with chaos. It arrives with architecture. Procedures. Professional executioners. Cheering crowds. And sacred justifications. Learning to recognize these elements, bureaucratization of cruelty, economic incentives, maintaining violence. Theatrical presentation, disguising brutality. Religious or ideological sanctification. These pattern recognition skills apply across centuries. Rome's system worked for 600 years, not because Romans were uniquely cruel, but because they successfully combined multiple elements that made violence self-sustaining. Entertainment value kept crowds complicit. Economic incentives kept industries invested. Religious justification kept consciences clear. Professional infrastructure kept machinery operating efficiently. The prisoner dressed as Orpheus, maybe you. Maybe someone you'd recognize if we had their name died. Because all these elements converged, and they keep converging whenever societies develop similar combinations. Medieval Europe inherited Roman blueprints. Modern authoritarian states rediscover them independently. The tools change, but patterns persist. Identify undesirable populations. Create legal frameworks justifying their elimination. Develop specialized infrastructure for killing. Transform violence into spectacle that educates while entertaining. Maintain system long enough that it becomes culturally normalized. Subscribe to Medieval Survival Skills because understanding how Rome systematized violence for 600 years isn't ancient history, it's pattern recognition training for identifying when contemporary systems are following. Historical scripts. The Colosseum receives millions of tourists annually who walk through spaces where thousands died violently. We've transformed these sites from killing grounds into educational resources. But the lessons they teach aren't about how different we are from Romans. They're about how similar the underlying human dynamics remain when power becomes absolute and populations become complicit. The survival wisdom from Roman arena culture. First, prevention beats resistance once you're in the underground cells. Your options are gone. Second, read escalating rhetoric about enemies and undesirables as warning signs that violence is being normalized. Third, understand that crowds cheering for violence aren't uniquely evil. They're ordinary people who've accepted brutality as normal through gradual cultural conditioning. Fourth, recognize that economic systems built around violence create stakeholders invested in maintaining cruelty. Fifth, see through religious or ideological justifications to actual purposes, power, demonstration, population control, elimination of dissidents. Sixth, document everything because recorded atrocities eventually become evidence against their perpetrators, even if it takes centuries. Seventh, Cultural transformation happens slowly across multiple fronts: economic, religious, political, social, requiring sustained effort. The Roman who attended arena spectacles wasn't monster. They were person living in system that made violence normal, profitable, entertaining, and morally justified. They probably considered themselves civilized while watching condemned prisoners torn apart. Probably felt righteous, witnessing enemies of Rome receive deserved punishment. Probably enjoyed themselves while people died for their amusement. This should terrify you more than individual brutality, because it reveals how easily entire populations accept systematic violence when it's packaged correctly. That's why understanding Roman arena culture matters for medieval survival and beyond. Not because we face identical threats, but because the underlying mechanisms, how violence gets normalized, how populations become complicit, how brutality gets systematized and sustained, these patterns keep repeating. Learn to recognize them early. Act before the machinery fully engages. And remember that the distance between civilization and the Colosseum is smaller than we'd like to believe. It's measured not in centuries, but in the number of justifications we're willing to accept for violence against those we've been taught to view as less than human.